The quiet moment in Japan that touched millions sometimes. The moments that speak the loudest are the ones where nothing is said at all. There was no dramatic music playing in the background. No spotlight suddenly shining brighter. No words exchanged that could be quoted or replayed. And yet, for countless fans around the world, that single moment in Japan, when Jungkook briefly looked away from V, felt heavier than any speech, any performance, or any headline. It was quiet, it was subtle, and it was deeply human. This is not a story about conflict. It is not about rumors, misunderstandings, or hidden drama. This is a story about emotion, connection, and the unspoken bond between two people who have grown up together under the brightest lights imaginable. BTS has shared countless stages, airports, behind-the-scenes moments, and casual interactions over the years. Fans have learned to notice the smallest details, the way they laugh, the way they support each other, the way they communicate without needing words. When fans saw Jungkook turn his gaze away from V, even briefly, it caught attention, not because it looked negative, not because it suggested tension, but because it felt different in that moment. Jungkook wasn't performing. He wasn't smiling for the camera. He wasn't playing the role fans often see. He looked human, vulnerable, thoughtful, and V, standing there, calm and composed as always, didn't react with confusion or discomfort. Instead, there was understanding. Something silent yet deeply familiar between them. That's what made fans emotional. In a world driven by constant noise, silence often carries the most meaning. For idols who live under constant observation, every gesture is analyzed. But sometimes, fans forget that idols are also people who experience emotions in ways that don't always translate into smiles or words. Looking away doesn't always mean avoidance. Sometimes, it means holding something in. Sometimes, it means protecting emotions that feel too personal to share. Jungkook has always been known as someone deeply emotional, even if he doesn't always express it openly. He feels intensely, loves sincerely, and reflects quietly. That moment in Japan felt like one of those quiet reflections. To understand why fans reacted so strongly, you have to understand the history Jungkook and V share. They didn't just debut together. They didn't just work together. They grew up together. From their teenage years to adulthood, they experienced success, pressure, criticism, joy, exhaustion, and growth side by side. Few people in the world can truly understand what they've been through, except each other. That kind of shared journey creates a bond that goes beyond words. It's not always loud or playful. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it's heavy. Sometimes it's just present. Japan has always been a meaningful place for BTS, from early showcases to sold-out stadiums, from nervous beginnings to overwhelming love from fans. Japan represents growth, memories, and milestones. Being in a place filled with memories can stir emotions, especially when you've lived so much life in such a short time. For Jungkook, standing there might have brought back memories of being the youngest, unsure but determined, learning and growing alongside the members, facing pressure while trying to stay strong sometimes. Emotions don't arrive loudly. They sit quietly in your chest. V has always had a unique way of being present. He doesn't rush emotions. He doesn't demand explanations. He allows space. In that moment, V didn't force interaction. He didn't react dramatically. He simply stayed, calm, steady, understanding. That alone says a lot about their relationship. Not every bond needs reassurance. Some bonds are built on trust so deep that silence feels safe. Fans didn't cry because something was wrong. They cried because something was real. In a world where idols are expected to always be perfect, always cheerful, always strong, seeing a quiet, emotional moment feels intimate. It reminds fans that Jungkook is human, V is human, their bond is human, and that honesty is powerful. It's important to say this clearly. There was no conflict, no argument, no hidden story that needs to be exposed. What happened was a moment, brief, quiet, and deeply personal, and sometimes those moments don't belong to explanation. The strongest relationships aren't defined by constant interaction. They're defined by comfort in silence, respect for emotional space, trust without explanation. That's what fans saw, not distance, but closeness, not avoidance, but vulnerability, long after performances. fade and schedules change, fans remember moments like this. Not because they were dramatic, but because they felt honest. Jungkook looking away wasn't weakness, it was strength, the strength to feel. And V standing there wasn't indifference, it was support, the kind that doesn't need words. This moment reminded fans of something important. Idols don't owe us constant access to their emotions. They don't owe us explanations for every feeling. They deserve privacy, understanding, and compassion. And when they share even a glimpse of their humanity, it's a gift. Jungkook couldn't face V, not because he didn't want to, but perhaps because he felt too much, and V didn't need him to explain, because some bonds are strong enough to be understood in silence. Not all emotions arrive with warning. Some appear suddenly, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary moment, when you least expect them and when you're least prepared to explain them. That's often how it feels for people who carry a lot inside. For Jungkook, being someone who grew up in front of millions, emotions were never something he could fully escape. From a young age, he learned how to perform, how to smile, how to be strong. But learning how to feel privately is a different kind of journey. That moment in Japan felt like one of those moments where emotions simply arrived, uninvited, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. Jungkook debuted as the youngest member, and for many years, fans saw him through that lens. The golden magne, the energetic performer, the smiling presence on stage. But growing up doesn't mean leaving emotions behind. In fact, it often means feeling them more deeply. As time passed, Jungkook didn't just grow taller or stronger. He grew more reflective, more aware, more sensitive to moments, memories, and meanings. Sometimes, looking away is not about running from someone. Sometimes, it's about facing yourself. Fans didn't react because of what they saw. They reacted because of what they felt. Many armies recognize that look. The one you make when emotions rise too quickly. The one you make when you're trying to stay composed, when you don't want your feelings to spill over in front of others. It's the look of someone holding back. Not because they're weak, but because they're strong enough to care. That's why it resonated. Jungkook and V's relationship has never needed constant validation. Sometimes they are playful, sometimes they are loud, sometimes they are quiet. And that quiet side is often the most misunderstood. Real friendships don't always look exciting. They look comfortable. They look like sitting in silence without discomfort, understanding without explanation, allowing space without distance. That's what fans saw in Japan. One of the most striking parts of the moment wasn't Jungkook looking away. It was V's response, or rather, his lack of reaction. There was no confusion, and awkwardness, and tension, just calm acceptance. That kind of response only comes from deep understanding. V didn't need Jungkook to look at him. He didn't need reassurance. He didn't need words. He already knew. Emotional safety is rare, especially in an industry that demands constant performance. Tio feels safe enough to not hide, to not explain, to simply be. That's powerful. Jungkook didn't look away because he felt unsafe. He looked away because he felt enough safety to allow himself a moment, and V gave him that space. Some moments aren't meant to be analyzed. They're meant to be felt. Fans weren't invited into that moment. They happened to witness it. And even then, what they saw was only the surface. Yet somehow, it still touched millions. That's the paradox of genuine emotion. It doesn't need context to be understood. In today's online world, moments are often turned into narratives. But not every moment needs a storyline. Not every emotion needs a reason. Not every silence needs an explanation. This moment didn't need to become something. It already was something quiet, sincere, and human. Being in Japan often brings a sense of reflection for artists. The culture values subtlety, respect, and emotional restraint. It's a place where silence isn't empty, it's meaningful. Perhaps that environment made the moment feel even heavier. Or perhaps it simply allowed it to exist without interruption. Either way, the setting mattered. Fans didn't cry out of fear. They cried out of empathy. Many saw themselves in Jungkook, holding emotions back, looking away, trying to stay composed in front of people who matter most. And many saw someone they trusted in V, calm, understanding, steady. That reflection made the moment universal. There's an unspoken expectation that idols should always be on. But idols are allowed to feel overwhelmed, feel nostalgic, feel emotional, feel quiet. They are allowed to have moments that don't translate into fan service or content. This was one of those moments. The most meaningful fan responses weren't theories. They were messages of support. Fans saying, "Take your time. We understand. You don't owe us anything." That's what real appreciation looks like. Some relationships don't need constant interaction to prove their strength. They don't need a public reassurance, dramatic gestures, explanations. They exist quietly, steadily, and honestly. That's what fans saw. Years from now, fans may not remember every performance detail, but they will remember this. Because it wasn't staged, IT wasn't planned, IT wasn't meant to impress, that IT was real. Jungkook didn't look away because something was wrong. He looked away because something mattered. And V didn't need to reach out because understanding was already there. This moment reminds us that strength can be quiet, a love can be silent. Understanding doesn't need words, and sometimes the most meaningful connections are the ones that don't ask for attention. In Japan, during a brief, quiet moment, fans were reminded why they connected with BTS in the first place. Not because of perfection, not because of spectacle, but because of humanity. Jungkook couldn't face V, and V didn't need him to, because some bonds are strongest when they're felt, not seen. Some stories don't wrap up neatly. They don't resolve with explanations. They don't conclude with statements. They simply continue, quietly, naturally. This is one of those stories. Schedules will change. Locations will change. Moments will blur together. But this feeling, the reminder of sincerity, humanity, and quiet connection will remain. Because it wasn't about what happened at IT, was about what was felt. If this moment reached them in any way, fans would likely say, "You don't need to explain. You don't need to perform. You're allowed to feel." And that may be the most meaningful support of all. In Japan, during a moment that lasted only seconds, something lasting was created. Not a headline, not a controversy, but a reminder that behind the stages, behind the fame, behind the expectations, there are people who feel deeply and care sincerely. Jungkook couldn't face V, and V didn't need him to. Because their bond didn't depend on eye contact, IT depended on understanding. Some moments aren't meant to be explained, they're meant to be respected. And this was one of them. Purple Heart.